Hey, Expanded Universe fans, if you haven't listened to all of our Cinema Craptacular shows, give them a listen. They're all on our podcast channel. There's B-Sides, Terror Tunnel, Real Debates, Cinema Craptaculous, and of course, the Expanded Universe, which is about to start now. Geek out! Hello, and thank you for joining us for this episode of Cinema Craptaculous presents The Expanded Universe with your hosts John H. Ford, Mario Doc Diaz, and Smoore. From movies to TV series to toys to comics to pop culture to streaming series to romantic comedies, this is your safe space for all things geeky and where you can get your geek on. This is John H., and with me as always are my geektacular co-hosts.
This is Doc.
Smoore!
All right, do you guys remember, and I mean everybody out there remember, when every other week there was some romantic comedy at the cinemas? You know, something starring Jennifer Aniston, Adam Sandler, Reese Witherspoon, Ben Stiller, or Sandy Bullock.
Sandy!
Yeah, I can barely remember it anyway. I'm talking about the 2000s particularly, but, you know, we're also talking about the 90s and the 80s. Anyway, the 2000s is when romantic comedies were starting to die out. It was really the 1990s when the genre ruled. As mid-budgeted films began to die off in the mid-2000s with larger tent poles taking over at the studios, so went the romantic comedy. But thanks to streaming services, many of these films are finding new audiences. We're even seeing the streamers themselves offer up new takes on this lovable genre. Is it a bygone era maybe coming back? Or is it a bygone era still bye-bye? And like that girlfriend we just can't quit, we can't let go of the rom-com. Is the rom-com making a return?
There's definitely been like a recent surge of the rom-com. Some people might say it never went away, but I guess some of the movies just weren't as hot or as popular as the ones that came out in the 90s and the early 2000s. Yeah, but like you mentioned, streaming services recently, like from December to now, have released a handful of rom-coms with pretty big names. And yeah, just like other genres, you know, they kind of like ebb and flow where they have like their run where they're super, super popular. They kind of die out and then they might come back. So it seems like right now it's like a little bit of a rom-com renaissance.
Yeah, I think I agree with Doc. I don't really necessarily think they went away because as far as I can remember, there's been some freaking rom-com coming out every year. I think maybe they just weren't as popular. You know, I don't think they've died out like, say, you know, the Western. Like the Western died.
The Western died. It was buried and pushing daisies.
Pushing daisies.
I don't think the Western died. I think it was just deconstructed, and people were like, "Oh yeah, you know what? There were other people that had it maybe worse than those white heroic cowboys. Maybe we should talk more about that."
Well, I think the rom-coms are very much like the Western because I know the Westerns are not as popular as they were like decades back, but every once in a while you still get like a gem. A movie pops up, but you even get like Oscar-nominated movies that are Westerns now, like Power of the Dog. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
I can't remember the name exactly.
Right.
But maybe that was a romantic comedy if you've got a really sick sense of humor.
Oh, damn. Yeah. But yeah, it's, like Sean mentioned, rom-coms just haven't been as high profile. And then, of course, within the rom-com genre, there are like subgenres. So it's like the friend rom-com or ensemble cast rom-com, like Love Actually. And you have a bunch of other movies that have come out, but you don't really specifically call them rom-coms, but they kind of fall into that category.
Well, it seems like they really did sort of crater a bit. And I'm talking about the box office. I think you guys are bringing up the notion that they're still around. We can see a rom-com. Yeah. It's available and new ones come up, but they're not being released theatrically. And I think they're maybe tied to the same sort of evolution of cinema right now that other genres are feeling too. Like, you know, even the action movie is kind of suffering at the cinema if it's not something familiar like a sequel or it's not a superhero movie. And rom-com, certainly, I think maybe to your point, they're still around maybe more so than the raunch comedy. I think that's one that's really suffered. I mean, theatrically, I know Will Ferrell and some of those guys are still trying to eke an existence out on Netflix and stuff, but nobody's paying to go see them. So do you guys feel like the niche is maybe comfortably settling into streaming? or do you think there's a possibility that they'll be making a comeback at the box office?
I honestly think that they're settling into the niche with streaming because, especially after the pandemic, just a lot of genres just were tanking or no one's going to see them. It's easier to watch in the comfort of your own bedroom. Speaking for I'm sorry, not bedroom. Well, I mean, depending on who you are, it could be your bedroom.
It's easier to put on some candles and, maybe some scented oil.
Right. Some other accoutrement. No, I think, especially speaking for myself, the only time I really go out to see big time movies now are tent poles, superheroes, sequels, because in my mind, they're worth spending the extra amount of money to park, to get the popcorn, and to pay for the ticket prices. Whereas
Smoore, Sandy is not worth all of that on the big screen anymore.
Well, she's my sole exception.
Because I think, is her film on streaming?
S-O-U-L,
is that, what is
Soul.
it, what's the name of the Channing Tatum film she's doing where she's, playing his mom? I'm sorry, playing his love interest.
Oh, damn.
Hater, man. Hater,
That's the
dude.
Lost City. The Lost City.
How dare you?
It's the lost genre, but trying to... No, but is it in the theaters or is it streaming?
It's still in the theaters, but I think it's recently gone to streaming.
I know, the window on these things are like 30 days in some cases, so...
Yeah, it did come out in theaters. Don't know how well it did. Probably not that well. I think studios are kind of like, testing the waters, seeing if there's interest for movies like that. When they announced it, I saw a trailer for it. I was interested. It kind of reminded me of like a Romancing the Stone type movie, which it's not. Has some elements, but I didn't see it in the theater. Eventually popped up on Paramount Plus. I watched it there, and I actually enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. Had great performances in it. It made me laugh, and I thought the two of them, were played really well off each other. And then Brad Pitt was also a delight in that movie.
Spoiler.
No, they show them the trailers.
Send trailers, dude.
Yeah.
Send trailers.
They show them the trailers.
I think that what we're not seeing, though, is that romantic comedies were vehicles they were star makers, and if they're not going to the theater, and you could apply this to, other films in general, if we're not seeing a big breakout hit to make a star. In fact, the last one I could think of that really made a star is probably Crazy Rich Asians with, Harry Golden?
Yeah,
I think he's
Harry
the
Golding,
one, the main
and Emma Chan.
Golding that,
Michelle Yeoh.
and again, you brought up the subgenres. I'm talking about sort of domestic release. There are probably a lot of international releases that might be, I'm sure in India, romantic comedies are still huge. So we're going to just kind of focus on U.S. releases.
Right.
But let's back up a bit and think about just go into the 2000s and think about, like Matthew McConaughey, his career was not doing well. And then he kind of had he did that, what was it, The Wedding Planner with J-Lo, was it, in like 2001? And then all of a sudden it was like his agents were like, hey now, you don't need to play that, that lawyer or try to do anything, the stoner character. Maybe we'll put you in rom-coms. And I remember him saying, like, I didn't really want to do it. But he did like Reese Witherspoon. He did another one.
He did Reese Witherspoon? Wow.
Yes. Well, I think he did it, and he did it. No.
He definitely did a string of them, but the problem is that they're kind of like forgettable, and they kind of just blend together. He did like 3 or 4 rom-coms.
Yeah,
they didn't do well, and then that's why he kind of disappeared for a while before eventually until we eventually got the McConaissance.
Yeah, didn't he do Failure to Launch, which failed to launch at the box office?
Well, I think these films were easy paychecks, but they kept his face out there. Reese Witherspoon, same thing.
Yeah.
She's not going to have a Ring of Fire Oscar-worthy performance coming around all the time. But those little romantic comedies that she
Sweet Home Alabama.
Yeah, well, is that 90s or was that 2000s?
I don't know. It all blends together. But she also had like Legally Blonde. What year was that? I don't know.
Maybe the 90s might have been the real heyday. I feel like that the 2000s there were some good ones, but the 90s seemed to be where the genre became bankable. What do you guys think?
For me, I know Ford's like mentioned the 2000s and the 90s, but I just want to go back one additional year, back to 1989, and that's when Harry Met Sally came out. And for me, when I think of rom-coms, I think that's like the granddaddy, the grandmama, whatever you want to call it. That movie came out, it was huge, and that was around the time where they coined the term rom-com. Like romantic comedies existed before that, but they started using the rom-com.
Is that your favorite?
That's one of my favorites. To this day, I enjoy it.
Overrated. Sorry, I have a frog in my throat.
Well, Smoore, what are some of your favorites?
Anything with Sandy?
That's funny because I was going to say that. No, 2 things. One, yes, love Sandra Bullock. And if you guys remember, especially in the late 90s, mid 90s, early 2000s, she did like a spate of different rom-coms. She did The Proposal, Love Potion #9, Hope Floats. So she was kind of the queen of rom-coms for a little bit. However, my favorite rom-com actress is Sandra Bullock, but my favorite rom-com was a little film back in 2000 called Love and Basketball. And this sort of ties into something else I want to bring in too. There was a time, I would say about 2 or 3 years at the beginning of 2000, where it's just like a string of black rom-coms. Love and Basketball, starring Sanaa Lathan and Omar Epps, was about two kids who loved basketball and loved each other while they loved the game. And for me, watching that back in 2000, it spoke to me a little bit because I was seeing people who looked like myself on screen in situations that weren't your stereotypical ghetto narrative or rising from crime, trying to fight the mean streaks. No, it was two suburban kids who loved basketball and loved each other. And plus I love basketball. So they showed a lot of that in the film. So that would be my favorite.
I think those are excellent points. I think Hollywood has been primarily Caucasian focused for decades, with the 2000s starting to turn a corner. But I think the crown that you mentioned earlier of the rom-com crown, I think it kind of rotated. It would float it around, kind of like that Miss America crown. Like, Julia Roberts had it big time in the 90s. And she came back here and there with like Notting Hill and Runaway Bride. And then it would go to Cameron Diaz. They would share it in the same movie,
Diaz.
That's right.
But then there's comedians that the film tends to be comic, but there's always a romantic component. And I think Eddie Murphy did a fair amount of that. He did Boomerang.
Which
was kind of a big step for him. He's not playing a zany, makeup covered, character like a sketch character like Nutty Professor, which also had a romance.
Check it. Jet Magazine.
So I think that the 90s did allow some comedians some romance angle. There are some comedians that sort of said, I don't think people believe me. I think Robin Williams kind of comes to mind as like, what? I don't know if they're going to see me as a romantic type. Did Robin ever do a romantic comedy? Moscow on the Hudson, Notwithstanding?
I think the closest maybe would be What Dreams May Come, when he was looking for his dead wife or dying wife.
Yeah, but she was dead.
But he still loved her.
Not funny unless you're high. If you're high, it's a hilarious movie.
Well, there you go.
Beautiful imagery in the movie.
Right?
Okay, so Doc said that When Harry Met Sally is sort of the daddy. And I think, but it did a very good box office. And I think it did kickstart into the 90s, sort of a cavalcade of these films. Then Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan sort of did their part to really bring box office. All of a sudden it became like, wow, you can make a lot of money with these films. Julia Roberts, too, and some others we mentioned. But I think we're forgetting that it was a revival itself, because the history of cinema in the 1940s and 30s, and they were all romantic comedies. Cary Grant was the romantic comedy lead, Katharine Hepburn, and then I think the 70s, it just, you had your, I don't want to do too much of a deep dive into that, but, you had like your Barbra Streisand.
Yeah. There's a lot of them.
Ryan O'Neal, those kinds of films, but they weren't huge box office. People wanted to cry, if anything,
well, John,
the way we were.
You never told us what's your favorite rom-com.
Well, it's kind of topical because of where I live now, but it has nothing to do with my favorites. But
is it The Spy Who Loved Me? Is that your favorite?
Yeah.
Oh, you know which one had some romance? You know which movie had a lot of romance and some comedy? Moonraker.
It did. It
had a lot of unintentional, intentional. Yeah. And there was rear entry. Re-entry. Maybe there was rear entry in the re-entry, but they couldn't. I don't know.
Moonraker.
Raking the moon.
Sounds wrong.
It does. Is this a family podcast? I don't know.
Sorry. So which was your favorite rom-com, Ford?
I don't think I have one favorite. Harry Met Sally's
overrated.
But it's apparently overrated. So no, I don't know if it'd be
Sean
my
also
favorite.
doesn't like pizza. Sean also doesn't like sweets. Sean doesn't like Thai food.
Doesn't like Star Wars.
They're all overrated.
I want to watch When Harry Met Sally with Smoore and just
and watch me bag on it.
You guys have fun, watching those rom-coms in your bedroom. Okay, you guys can have your own tent. You guys can have your own tent poles together. Together.
Allow me to defend myself. Here's why I say When Harry Met Sally is overrated. Now, it's not a bad film. It's just a lot of what's taking place in that film, to me, felt like bullshit. Like
you don't buy the premise, or you feel like it was just not romantic?
It wasn't romantic. If anything, it was annoying. It's like they meet, they kind of hit it off, they kind of fight. They're kind of annoying people, both of them.
It really was if Jerry and Elaine made it.
Yeah, pretty much.
Like if they actually worked out.
If you analyze their relationship, they probably should have never been together because they're fundamentally incompatible people. Really?
Billy Crystal's character also, you have to like Billy Crystal because his character really is not that likable.
No,
and I
he's
think
a
any other actor cast in that could really have made that film unappealing. I think Billy Crystal, it was the right vehicle for his talents to just be believable, that attractively, I should say, that you would buy Meg Ryan. Although I remember watching and going like, no way a woman that hot would find him attractive.
I'm sorry. We can't put all the blame on Billy Crystal. Meg Ryan. You have to really like Meg Ryan too, because her
apparently people did for a while.
She was the queen of the rom-coms.
Yeah. To answer your question, I think it's tough because I think that the Brits, and I'm not saying that because of present circumstances, I think they have or did win me over for a long time with that run of, what's the name of the production company that did those films? But starting with
Hammer Films?
No, Hammer, right? Boy, I tell you, that Peter Cushing, when he had that scene with I think that Four Weddings and the Funeral really hit a sweet spot, and then they kind of continued their run with Notting Hill and Love Actually, About a Boy, and obviously the common denominator is Hugh Grant.
Those are
but
good.
The Bridget Jones films.
Well, is Hugh Grant the British
first
king of the rom-com?
He was, and
for a while, he was for a while.
He did not enjoy that title. He's not going to turn down a check, especially after what happened in Hollywood. He kind of had to take what.
Yeah.
For younger viewers, listeners, they may not remember that Hugh Grant had a little action on Hollywood Boulevard that he paid for.
Prostitution.
He paid for, then he paid for.
Was that Divine Brown, or was that someone else? Was that Eddie Murphy?
Yeah.
The fact that we remember that prostitute's name,
right. And he was dating Elizabeth Hurley too at the time.
That's
right. And then he went on Jay Leno, and Jay Leno famously asked, "What were you thinking?"
How would Hugh Grant respond to that?
Well, he threw his big mop of hair. I don't remember what he said, but that's how you handle scandal, man, is you just admit to it dead on.
Yeah.
And now everybody's like trying to obfuscate and spin it and social. I mean, he's lucky that social media wasn't around, but
it's a different world now. It's a different
getting
world.
a little off topic. I think the Brits, just their sense of humor worked for me for a while. I felt like because the setups weren't overly cloying. Yeah, I think there's some tropes, a lot of tropes, probably more than any other genre in romantic comedies. The best friend protagonist, she always works in publishing, or they work in an advertising agency. It's always some sort of office setting because, if they work at, the zoo, it might be a little harder to film. Mm-hmm. It's easier to do interiors when they work in an office. But the Brits, I just felt like that window made sort of the films that I liked. If you ask me my favorite, though, it's more of a comedy than romantic comedy, but I still think it qualifies, and that would be 1982's Tootsie with Dustin Hoffman. That, for me, is probably my favorite romantic comedy.
Okay.
Well, I still haven't seen Tootsie.
It's a good movie. It's a fun movie.
It's dated, and it's now a musical that they totally redesigned it top to bottom.
Yeah.
But you couldn't do that movie now.
No. Oh, God.
No. Dressing up as a no. It's so funny. Oh, yeah. You would offend everybody, and I think it would be a film that would unite the left and the right for both being offended.
That's hilarious. May I mention another underrated gentleman of the rom-coms from the United States who made one of my favorite rom-coms out there? It came out in the mid-90s, I believe. That was Mr. John Cusack. And he did a little film called Say Anything.
Oh, wow.
For those who are too young to remember Say Anything, you've probably seen the most famous scene where you see a dude in a trench coat holding a boom box, which is an ancient form of music playing back then, over his head, blasting the song "In Your Eyes" by Peter Gabriel.
That was a great movie. That was a great movie.
1989.
1989. Yeah, really nice movie. Had John Mulaney is that Mahoney in there, of Frasier fame. He played the dad, John Cusack, and Ione Skye, who disappeared pretty much after this film. But it's
That's right.
it's a wonderful little film, well written, well acted.
That was Cameron Crowe, right?
Cameron Crowe, yeah.
But if I recall correctly, John Cusack, like a lot of these actors, he had to be talked into it because he, first of all, really wanted to kind of graduate from high school movies. He was kind of like in his 20s and like, guys, and fortunately, Crowe convinced them, said, you have to do this. You have to be Lloyd Dobler. And that's a good one. And he went on to do High Fidelity, which was the American version of it, because based on the Nick Hornby novel, which was a British novel. And he was good in that. And I think there are just some actors that almost resist wanting to be a romantic leading man, but they are just, I don't know if they can deliver the comedy or they're able to just find the chemistry with the right co-star, but they're just, that's their wheel, and they resist it, and they don't want to do it because they're like, I'm an actor, I want to play character roles, I want to be murderous.
I'm an actor.
Then they show them the paycheck, and they're like, yes, I will be a romantic lead. Yeah, but real quick about Say Anything, something that's cool about it is that to this day on Halloween, you always see one person dressed up like Lloyd Dobler, trench coat.
We know one in particular.
Yeah, it's a fun costume. Yeah, and when we see it, we're like, Say Anything.
Smoore, nobody's dressing up as Harry and Sally.
No. You know why? Overrated.
Hey, we'll be right back. And now, back to the show.
Real quick, you guys remember Grosse Point Blank, where John Cusack dressed up like Portland
Another
mobster?
romantic comedy.
Yes, dressed up like Portland mobster John Ford.
Oh, yeah, that's funny. John Cusack, every couple of years, he'd drop one. He'd drop one. Yeah, that's constipation.
Every couple of years, he needs some fiber in his diet.
Yeah, not a happy man. No, he would do a film every couple of years, and I'm sure he probably hates talking about them, but that's what people remember him for. And John Hughes sort of kicked off the teen version of that, and those teen ones, I think, we could do a whole show on them. Maybe we should, 10 Things I Hate About You and She's All That. And
we should.
And that
Rom-Coms Part 2.
But I don't want to get too psychological, but there were discussions that perhaps romantic comedies were not good for people to watch. As much as violent films could potentially lead to violent behavior and nihilistic films could lead to nihilistic behavior, there were articles I remember reading where this sort of fairy tale notion was causing sort of unrealistic expectations among sort of the female viewers, and that it was not a healthy view that this is how, to an impressionable young woman or a young guy, that this is how a relationship is going to start and progress. But what do you guys think? Do you think that's just sort of psychopablum, or do you think there's some point to that?
Well, I think with When Harry Met Sally, it was the opposite. Two unlikable people can find love. So it's the opposite. Yeah. Yeah, I think, is it like the whole thing where it's kind of like a bit of FOMO, where people are seeing these relationships form and they're like, I want that. Is that what the argument was about these movies? Yeah,
you could apply that to romance novels. You could apply that to Shakespeare. Most stage plays that were dealt with romance. But particularly, there's such a formula with romance, more so than raunch comedies. It's like an underdog that triumphs at the end, and there's potty jokes along the way. Action hero, they're all formula, but rom-com is sort of like fodder for women the way action films were for men. However, the argument, and again, I wish I had the articles, they were probably like 15 years ago, but they said that men are less likely to sort of project themselves as an action hero. Like, it's sort of like we can watch the escapist Bond movie or John McClane movie or John Wick, or we could say, oh yeah, well, Will Smith kicks ass, but I'm not going to go out and be that. No. I'm not a cop. I'm not, but some people might watch a romantic comedy and really project that that's maybe how it's going to go. Well, I don't know. Maybe we should have a female guest to weigh in.
We probably should, which is why we should do a part 2. But I do tend to agree with that assessment. I think for the most part, a lot of rom-coms have created unrealistic expectations of love. One film comes to mind, and it perpetuates something that people has referred to as a nice guy syndrome. And I do agree with this. The film is called 500 Days of Summer. It had Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Zooey Deschanel.
Was that Mark Webb?
That is Mark Webb. And people, if you paid attention to the film doesn't portray the protagonist, Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character, in a positive light, yet a lot of people feel that it does. It created the nice guy syndrome. He's a nice guy. The character's a really nice guy who falls in love with a girl who ultimately is not interested, and it makes him angry. because he felt like he was a nice guy and he was entitled and he didn't get the girl. Sorry, spoilers if you haven't seen the film. And it made him very angry. And a lot of people saw him as a hero for this. They felt that he deserved the girl, when in reality, that's not remotely true. And I think that created unrealistic expectations of what romance actually should be.
We could draw the parallels between action films and whether they're sort of misleading. And I guess the question is whether they're harmful. Romance novels have always been popular. And
Twilight!
Yeah. But I think that the one thing about, I think, romantic comedies that I think are appealing is that they offer hope. And maybe that's unrealistic hope, but it might be hope that helps maybe inspire people to be better. But, these people on screen are not usually hideous. A lot of times, especially in the 2000s, there were some very good looking people. I mean, that's Hollywood. And that might be the most unrealistic thing of all, is this very attractive girl is just having a hard time meeting the right guy, and she can't meet men, and she's nerdy, and and I'm like, oh my God, please.
Yeah,
or
she's
some
all that.
good looking dude. Yeah, some good-looking dude. I mean, oh wow, James Marsden really is going to have a hard time meeting a girl.
So, John,
whoever.
what you're saying is that ugly people can find love too. So, y'all ugly people, you can find love. Don't worry about it.
Well, as we get to sort of the third act of our conversation, Doc, what are you seeing out there? Because we're talking about, is the rom-com returning? And you said that there's a lot on streaming, a lot of movies and series, and you've seen some of this stuff. So, what are your observations? What pops?
Yeah, I've seen quite a few of them, just for research, because I knew we were doing this podcast. So that's why I watched all these movies. But
with accoutrements?
Accoutrement.
Within the last 6 months, you've had Marry Me, which is Jennifer Lopez, and what's his name? Lightning McQueen. Owen Wilson. Sorry, I can't remember his name.
Wow.
But, that came out on Peacock.
Wow. I've not seen that. Wow.
That came out on Peacock. Great talent, great production. The story, of course, was a little predictable. You kind of knew what direction it was going in. Amazon had I Want You Back.
I Want You Back.
That story's a little different. I liked all of the cast. The script could have used like another go-around, some polishing. They had Book of Love, which was also on Amazon, which is the one Ford mentioned earlier, which is, what's his name? Sam Claflin, is that his name?
I mentioned it before we started, that I said I was going to watch it as research, and I didn't. So,
and then I said, "Oh, don't worry, don't worry, I got you back. I've already seen it." So,
are these films, are they addressing a more diverse cast, aka a more diverse audience, or are they sort of perpetuating sort of your standard 90s, 2000, white people in New York in nice jobs?
No. Well, of course, Marry Me has Jennifer Lopez. So there's some diversity there. Book of Love, it's Sam Claflin, but then the love interest, she's Mexican. So, and a lot of the movie takes place in Mexico. So that's a pretty big thing. Single All the Way was a holiday rom-com that came out on Netflix, which was what's her name? Dobrev?
Nina Dobrev.
Nina Dobrev. Yeah, she's in there. And then the love interest there, I can't remember his name. He's a comedian, Asian comedian. I forgot his name.
I did watch, I think Cinema Craptaculous, we did review He's All That last fall. Which was a remake of She's All That. And, that's that whole teenage genre. But, teenagers are the ones, if they're talking about, being impressionable on people, it's the younger minds. And I felt like we brought up a lot of films that maybe we watched when we were teenagers. Do you think that they are addressing those? Or are they still, that audience, are these films mainly for adults, like 18 and older, I should say?
I think it's a little of both. There's definitely some movies out there that are aimed at adults, with actors that are older. But then there are a lot of teen ones too on streaming services. Like you mentioned, She's All That. That's very young. It's a reboot or a remake of the 90s movie. Yeah, I definitely think there's movies out there for both, because there's quite a few on like Netflix and available for streaming. A lot of them just kind of blend together. I can't remember the names, but they do have younger casts.
Do you guys think this concept works for streaming series, or do you think it needs to be its strength is in a movie because it's a 3-act structure?
I honestly feel like it depends on the storytelling. Certain comedies and romance lend itself to certain storytelling mechanisms. Do you really want to watch a 7-part series of someone's romance?
Bridgerton.
Yeah, they
did
do
very well.
They do exist. Snowdrop is Korean, with Jisoo from Blackpink. So There's an audience for it. Yeah, maybe it's better for like a series, like a limited series, because like in a lot of long running shows, whenever there's like sexual tension between two characters, once they get together, it's kind of over. So maybe like they can have several episodes, but just kind of like a limited series, and then at the end they get together and that's it.
But that's what soap operas are for.
Right. And they're very funny. It seems like there's opportunity, and maybe we're seeing it with LGBTQ representation. I think I saw a trailer for one film, and again, I can't tell if this stuff's going to the cinemas. It seems like everything's just going to streaming because, to Doc's earlier point, no one wants to spend that kind of money to see something that's not like going to blow you away. But in the old days, that's where you'd take a date to. You'd go to romantic comedy on a date. Do young people not date? I don't know.
They date online.
It's all done over FaceTime.
They just tend to swipe left or right. That's the dating.
Right. I don't know. My formative years were going to, whether it was something like Teen Wolf, which had a romance, or, and then even in, later years. But I just don't know if the appetite is there, because even though people always want to see a love story, they may, I don't know, maybe they're not seeing themselves, so they don't give a shit. Or maybe they're over the concept. I don't know. You guys seem to think that rom-coms are still here.
They are. But again, I think a lot of it has to do with what you see in yourself. As I told you before, I liked a lot of the black rom-coms in the early 2000s because I saw me. Maybe other people feel the same way.
So guys, would you feel that the romantic comedy is making a comeback? Do you feel it never left? Or do you feel it's morphed into something else, and it's maybe we will have to redefine the genre, as Doc kind of said we did with...
No, I think it's morphed.
Sally.
I think it's changed. The rom-coms never went away. They just died down. And I think maybe their popularity has waxed and waned over the years, but it certainly has transformed. What was considered romantic or exciting 30 years ago isn't the case now. And I think the newer material is probably trying to reflect that the best as it can.
Yeah, I think the audience, their interest kind of changed over the years. For a while, like you said, in the 90s, 2000s, they're really, really super popular with a lot of big names attached. Then in between 2000s and now, they kind of went to the wayside. They didn't go away. There was always, some romantic comedies coming out. They just weren't as big. And I think right now there's just a big push for it. It might be fatigue of these tentpole films, and people are just looking for something different to watch.
Well, I think they've woven romantic comedy into those tentpole films. The Spider-Man, at least the first two, were kind of romantic comedies. The Tom Holland films, right? Would you agree?
I think overall, like all movies have some romantic elements. They usually try to include some kind of relationship.
I think that actually one of the most, I don't want to say groundbreaking, but I thought one of the more interesting romantic comedies was My Best Friend's Wedding with Julia Roberts and Cameron Diaz and was it Dermot Mulroney and Rupert Everett? And because the girl does not get the guy at the end and she has to let go of the guy. And I remember watching it going like, wow, I mean, it was formulaic, but it also broke the formula. She ends up, dancing with the gay friend at the wedding and watches her best friend.
I hate to say this, but that's nothing new. Did you watch a little film called Casablanca? Which, by the way,
not a comedy. Not a comedy.
We have a friend who will fight me to the death about the importance of that film. But he also had to give up the girl.
It's not a comedy, though. I'm talking about romantic. That is more romance. Now, that's a whole other thing, because a romance can be funny. But I don't necessarily think it's a romantic comedy. I think there are films that are romantic that have funny moments in them, like The Time Traveler's Wife. Probably had humor in it, another British one. But it wasn't a romantic comedy. I think that was a romance.
Okay. Yeah, I agree.
Oh, what was the movie with Domhnall Gleeson who could also time travel?
Oh, no, It's About Time.
Yeah, It's About Time.
I think it was a romance, and I think it had funny moments.
You know what? I got
depends.
one. I got one. We talked about it. Say Anything. It's not a romantic comedy, but it has comedic elements in it. It's a straight up romance movie.
And I think that's a great example. Whereas I think Grosse Point Blank was a romantic comedy with action in it.
Exactly. 500 Days of Summer, not a romantic comedy, but comedic elements in it.
What director would you like to see take their hand at romantic comedy that has not done a romantic comedy before?
Christopher Nolan.
Christopher Nolan.
Okay, all right. I can go for that. No, I was going to say Martin Scorsese.
Those are good answers. I would like to see. I'd like to see Quentin Tarantino. Tarantino has not done a straight up love story.
If Christopher Nolan directed a romantic comedy, most of the film you wouldn't be able to understand what some of the two leads are saying to each other.
How dare you.
Audio levels are like all over the charts.
Introspection of love on another cosmic universal level.
I love you.
Martin
I love you so
Scorsese
much.
would be a great choice because it would be just full of profanity.
Fucking love you. Like, get out of
Someone
here.
would end up dead.
Yep.
Well, guys, I think that I want to totally edit a female guest into this episode. Not like
Yes.
as a separate, but just put in like a female guest's voice and just put it in. And I'll bet you it would just be contradicting everything we're saying. Because I think there is a point of view that influences this discussion. We all have our own point of views. And like I said, if we brought in somebody who is 10 years older than us or 10 years younger, just the age demo, I think, would totally change opinions. So
10 years younger, so they're teenagers?
I just mean that I think that romantic comedies really appeal kind of in the era that they're in. You know, like you think fondly of a film because maybe you're at a certain age. Whereas some action films, I think they can still be watched over and over. I think romantic comedies tend to be a little dated because the humor sometimes doesn't hold up.
Well, that's comedy in general. Comedy tends to be dated because humor depends on the time period.
Yeah. Fair enough.
And something about just a lot of movies in general, a lot of movies now incorporate social media, texting and mobile, when as opposed to like years back that wasn't really around, so that didn't show up. But earlier I mentioned I got some movies mixed up. Earlier I said it was Single All the Way. I think I said that was Nina Dobrev, and name I couldn't remember was Jimmy Yang. Turns out that was Love Hard, and that had a big social media element to it. Basically, he was like catfishing her, and she likes posting pictures of some other guy, and she ends up tracking him down in person, and he's like, wait a minute. He freaks out because it's, she thinks.
Did you say it's called Love Hard?
Yeah, it's
sure it wasn't porn.
It's called Love Hard.
Sounds like
It's on Netflix.
You have your accoutrement when you watch that film. I think that cable
Yeah,
television also had a whole genre, and we know it well, of these, we would have called them direct-to-video, but like, the cutting edge, too. They like take romantic films from the 90s, and they just make sequels out of them. And I'm assuming that most of the Hallmark and Lifetime films outside of Christmas are just romantic comedies, right?
A lot of those direct-to-video movies are now considered direct-to-streaming videos.
Right. And I can't imagine, they probably are very funny, but not intentionally when you watch them. Guys like us would probably watch a lot of that film and just be laughing.
Lisa, you're tearing me apart.
Oh.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't there a KFC romantic movie on one of the Lifetime networks?
Wait, I'm sorry. You watch it? Is KFC sponsoring it, or is it about like someone working at KFC?
It was about the Colonel. The Colonel is a young man.
I think that was a joke. Wasn't it like Mario Lopez? Didn't he dress up?
It was Mario Lopez.
He dressed
He
up
was
like the Colonel.
right?
I think it was a spoof trailer, like a parody trailer. I think that Marvel should do a straight up romantic comedy, like really focus
They did. It's called One Division.
and it was so funny right up until things were extremely not funny.
It's a tragic romantic comedy.
Well, guys, this has been fun. I don't know if I'm necessarily motivated to go out and just watch a romantic comedy, but I will say that I think that, I'm married, and I think that sometimes you do just want something light and fluffy where there's a happy ending without like bullets and costumes and superpowers. So I think that maybe that's the appeal, is that you want to have a moment of fantasy with or without accoutrement.
Yeah.
Well, real quick, just pointing out the recent movies released on streaming and some in theaters. The one that I recommend out of the ones that we have mentioned is The Lost City. Yeah, because it's not a straight up romantic comedy, but has a lot of comedy, has romance in it, has a little action in it too. So it has a little bit for everything. Like I mentioned, great performances. I enjoyed watching it. It's on Paramount Plus. So that's Doc's pick.
Smoore, who's in that?
My sweet, sweet Sandy Bullock. Watch it, y'all. It's Sandy Bullock.
Support your local Sandy.
Thank you to our listeners, both openly geeky and closeted geeky, for joining us on this expanded universe journey. This has been Smoore, and with me always are my geektacular co-hosts.
This is Doc.
And John H.H.
And remember that this is your safe space to talk about all things geeky and where you can get your geek on. Geek out!
Thank you for geeking out with us on the expanded universe. Hey, if there is a geeky or pop culture topic you would like us to dive into on our show, we'd love to hear from you. Or if you just want to comment, agree, or disagree, let us know by following us on Twitter and Instagram. Our handle is @Craptaculous. Cinema Craptaculous is also on Facebook, and you can find more content at cinemacraptaculous.com.